Marcus Williams walked through the hallways of Jefferson Middle School with his head down, clutching his worn backpack straps. The 12-year-old had learned to make himself invisible, moving quickly between classes to avoid the groups of students who seemed to find entertainment in his discomfort. His sneakers, with holes near the toes, made soft squeaking sounds against the polished floors as he hurried toward his next class. The school sat in an affluent neighborhood where most families drove luxury cars and lived in houses with manicured lawns. Marcus lived 20 minutes away in a small apartment with his grandmother, Rose Williams, who worked double shifts at the local diner to make ends meet. Every morning, he took 2 buses to reach Jefferson Middle School, arriving early and staying late because his grandmother couldn't pick him up until after her evening shift ended. Mrs. Henderson, his English teacher, often watched Marcus with concern. She noticed how he sat alone during lunch, reading library books while other students chatted and laughed in their established groups. His homework was always completed perfectly, written in careful handwriting that suggested he took great pride in his academic work. But socially, Marcus remained an outsider looking in. The trouble started during third period on a Tuesday morning in October. Marcus was walking past the music room when he heard the familiar sound of piano keys being played. The melody was simple, something he recognized from a commercial on television. His feet slowed involuntarily, and he found himself standing near the open doorway, listening to the student practice scales. Jennifer Lawson, one of the most popular girls in 7th grade, spotted him first. She nudged her friend Sarah, pointing toward Marcus with a smirk. "Look at him," she whispered, loudly enough for others to hear. "He's probably never even seen a real piano before." Mr. Davidson, the music teacher, looked up from his desk where he was grading papers. He was a thin man in his 50s with graying hair and wire-rimmed glasses. He had taught at Jefferson for 15 years, long enough to recognize the social dynamics that played out daily among his students. Unfortunately, he had also developed certain assumptions about students based on their backgrounds and appearances. "Marcus," Mr. Davidson called out, his voice carrying an edge of condescension. "Why don't you come in here for a moment?" Marcus hesitated, knowing that nothing good ever came from being singled out by teachers when other students were around. But refusing would only make things worse, so he stepped into the music room. The space was filled with various instruments, music stands, and posters of famous composers on the walls. The grand piano sat in the center like a beautiful, intimidating centerpiece. "Have you ever played piano before?" Mr. Davidson asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "No, sir," Marcus replied quietly, aware that more students were gathering near the doorway to watch whatever was about to unfold. Jennifer giggled behind her hand. "I bet he doesn't even know what all those keys do," she whispered to her friends. Mr. Davidson stood up from his desk and walked over to the piano bench. "Well, then, this should be educational for everyone. Marcus, why don't you sit down here and try to play something? Anything at all." The invitation was clearly meant to embarrass. Mr. Davidson had done this before with students he considered unworthy of his music program, using their lack of musical training as entertainment for the more privileged students. He believed he was teaching them humility while reinforcing the social order he had observed for years. Marcus looked at the piano bench, then at the growing crowd of students watching from the doorway. His heart pounded in his chest, and his palms felt sweaty. He wanted to run, to find an excuse to leave, but something inside him refused to back down. Maybe it was pride, or maybe it was exhaustion from constantly being treated as less than everyone else. "Go ahead, Marcus," Mr. Davidson encouraged with fake enthusiasm. "Don't be shy. Just press some keys and see what happens." The students began to murmur among themselves, anticipating the spectacle they expected to witness. Some had their phones ready, hoping to capture Marcus's humiliation for social media. This was the kind of moment that could follow him for the rest of his middle school years and beyond. Marcus approached the piano slowly, his heart racing with each step. The beautiful instrument seemed to glow under the classroom lights, its keys perfectly white and black, arranged in a pattern that most people found mysterious and intimidating. He had never touched a real piano before, but something about it felt familiar, as if he had been waiting his whole life for this moment. He sat down on the bench and placed his fingers on the keys. The smooth, cool surface felt right under his fingertips. Around him, the whispers and giggles continued as students waited for the show to begin. Mr. Davidson crossed his arms and leaned against his desk, a satisfied smile playing on his lips. What happened next would change everything. Marcus closed his eyes and let his fingers find their way across the keys. Instead of the random noise everyone expected, beautiful, complex music began to fill the room. His fingers moved with incredible precision and grace, playing a classical piece that most of the students didn't recognize but could tell was extraordinarily difficult. The whispers stopped immediately. Phones that had been raised to record his embarrassment were slowly lowered as students stared in amazement. The melody was not just technically perfect, but emotionally powerful, filling every corner of the music room with rich, beautiful sound. Mr. Davidson's smile faded, replaced by confusion and disbelief. This was not what he had planned. This was not what was supposed to happen. Marcus continued playing, his eyes still closed, completely lost in the music. His fingers danced across the keys with the skill of someone who had been training for years. The piece he chose was Chopin's Minute Waltz, a notoriously difficult composition that even advanced students struggled to master. Students from other classrooms began to gather in the hallway, drawn by the incredible music echoing through the school corridors. Teachers stopped their lessons to listen, unable to believe what they were hearing. The entire school seemed to pause, captivated by the beautiful sounds coming from the music room. When Marcus finally finished the piece, the room fell into complete silence. His eyes opened slowly, and he looked around at the shocked faces staring back at him. Jennifer's mouth was hanging open in disbelief. Sarah had tears in her eyes from the emotional power of the music. Other students stood frozen, trying to process what they had just witnessed. Mr. Davidson stepped forward, his face pale and his hands trembling slightly. Where did you learn to play like that?" he stammered. Marcus stood up from the piano bench, his confidence growing with each passing second. For the first time in months, he felt like himself again. "I taught myself," he said simply, his voice stronger than it had been in a long time. The admission sent another wave of shock through the gathered crowd. Self-taught musicians were rare, and self-taught musicians who could play at this level were almost unheard of. The skill Marcus had just demonstrated typically required years of expensive lessons, dedicated practice time, and access to quality instruments. "But how?" Jennifer asked, her earlier mockery completely forgotten. "How did you learn to play like that without lessons?" Marcus looked at her, then at Mr. Davidson, then at all the faces watching him with new respect and curiosity. "My grandmother has an old keyboard she bought at a thrift store," he explained. "It only has 60 keys, and half of them stick, but I've been playing on it every day for 4 years. I watch YouTube videos and practice whenever I can." The revelation made his achievement even more impressive. While his classmates had access to expensive instruments and private tutors, Marcus had developed extraordinary skill using a broken keyboard and free internet videos. His dedication and natural talent had overcome every obstacle placed in his path. Mr. Davidson cleared his throat, clearly struggling to regain his composure and authority. "Well," he said, his voice lacking its earlier confidence, "that was unexpected." But Marcus wasn't finished. The humiliation he had endured, not just today, but for months, seemed to fuel his determination. "Would you like me to play something else?" he asked, his voice carrying a quiet challenge. The question hung in the air like a dare. Everyone in the room understood that the dynamics had completely shifted. The student they had underestimated and tried to humiliate had just proven himself more talented than anyone had imagined possible. Word of what had happened in the music room spread through Jefferson Middle School like wildfire. By lunchtime, everyone was talking about Marcus Williams and his incredible piano performance. Students who had never acknowledged his existence before were approaching him in the hallways, wanting to know more about his musical background. But the real changes were just beginning. The days following Marcus's unexpected performance brought significant changes to his life at Jefferson Middle School. Students who had previously ignored him now stopped him in hallways, asking questions about his musical abilities and requesting that he play again. Teachers looked at him with new interest and respect, realizing they had completely misjudged one of their students. Mr. Davidson, however, struggled with what had happened in his classroom. For 15 years, he had prided himself on identifying musical talent and nurturing promising students. The fact that he had missed Marcus's extraordinary abilities and, worse, had tried to humiliate him challenged everything he thought he knew about teaching and talent recognition. 3 days after the piano incident, Mr. Davidson approached Marcus after school. The music room was empty, and late afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the floor. Marcus was walking past the room when the teacher called out to him. "Marcus, could you spare a few minutes?" Mr. Davidson asked, his tone much different from their previous interaction. Marcus stopped and entered the room cautiously. He had learned not to trust sudden changes in how adults treated him, especially when those changes came after public displays of his abilities. "I want to apologize," Mr. Davidson began, removing his glasses and cleaning them nervously. "What I did the other day was wrong. I made assumptions about you based on your background, and I tried to use you for entertainment. That was unprofessional and cruel." Marcus listened without responding, waiting to see where this conversation would lead. "I've been teaching for 15 years, Mr. Davidson continued, "and I've never encountered raw talent like yours. The piece you played, the technical skill you demonstrated, it's remarkable for someone who's self-taught." "Thank you," Marcus said simply, still unsure of the teacher's intentions. Mr. Davidson walked over to the piano and ran his hand along its polished surface. "I'd like to offer you private lessons during lunch and after school. No cost, of course. It would be my privilege to help develop your gift." The offer surprised Marcus. He had dreamed of proper piano lessons, but knew his grandmother couldn't afford them. However, accepting help from the man who had tried to embarrass him felt complicated. "Why?" Marcus asked directly. Mr. Davidson sighed deeply. "Because I was wrong about you, and I want to make it right. Because talent like yours deserves proper nurturing. And because I've learned something important about prejudice and assumptions that I need to address in myself." Marcus considered the offer carefully. Despite his hurt feelings about the initial incident, he recognized this as an opportunity that might not come again. "I'd like that," he said finally. "Excellent," Mr. Davidson smiled, the first genuine smile Marcus had seen from him. "We'll start tomorrow. And, Marcus, I want you to know that what you accomplished on that keyboard at home shows more dedication and natural ability than I've seen from students with every advantage." Their first lesson began the next day during lunch period. Mr. Davidson started by asking Marcus to demonstrate his current skills, listening carefully to identify areas where formal training could enhance his natural abilities. What he discovered amazed him even more than that first performance had. Marcus had developed his own fingering techniques to compensate for his keyboard's missing keys. His timing was impeccable, his emotional expression sophisticated, and his memorization abilities extraordinary. However, his hand positioning and breathing techniques needed refinement to prevent injury and increase endurance. "You're like a brilliant athlete who's been training without proper form," Mr. Davidson explained during their second lesson. "Your natural talent got you incredibly far, but proper technique will take you to levels you haven't imagined yet." As the weeks progressed, Marcus's skills developed rapidly under professional guidance. Mr. Davidson introduced him to new composers, more complex pieces, and advanced techniques. But more importantly, he helped Marcus understand music theory, giving him the knowledge to compose his own pieces and improvise with confidence. Word of Marcus's lessons and growing abilities spread beyond Jefferson Middle School. Mrs. Rodriguez, the high school music teacher, visited one afternoon to hear him play. She watched in amazement as he performed a piece by Rachmaninoff that typically challenged college-level pianists. "Mr. Davidson," she said after Marcus finished, "this student needs opportunities beyond what we can provide here. He should audition for the State Youth Orchestra, maybe even consider conservatory programs." The suggestion opened new possibilities that Marcus had never considered. He had always viewed music as a personal escape and source of joy, not as a potential career path. But conversations with his teachers began to change his perspective on what might be possible. Meanwhile, his social life at school continued to evolve. Jennifer Lawson, who had mocked him on that first day, approached him during lunch with a surprising request. "Marcus," she said, looking genuinely embarrassed about their earlier encounter, "I'm sorry about what happened in the music room. I was being mean and stupid." "It's okay," Marcus replied, though they both knew the hurt she had caused wasn't easily forgotten. "Could you maybe teach me to play something?" she asked hopefully. "I've been taking lessons for 3 years, but I can't play anything as beautiful as what you did that day." Marcus looked at her carefully, trying to determine if this was another setup for humiliation. But her expression seemed sincere, and he realized that holding grudges would only limit his own growth. "Sure," he agreed, "but I'm still learning too. Mr. Davidson is teaching me proper technique." Jennifer's face lit up with genuine happiness. "Really? Thank you so much." Their first practice session took place the following week. Marcus discovered that teaching someone else helped him understand music theory concepts more deeply. Jennifer, despite 3 years of expensive lessons, had developed bad habits that limited her progress. Marcus helped her correct her hand positioning and timing, drawing on the techniques Mr. Davidson had taught him. Other students began requesting help as well. Marcus found himself leading informal practice sessions after school, working with classmates who wanted to improve their musical skills. His reputation shifted from outcast to respected mentor, and friendships began to develop naturally. But the most significant change came when Marcus decided to perform at the school's winter concert. Mr. Davidson had suggested he participate, but Marcus initially declined, worried about performing for a large audience that included parents and community members. "I understand your hesitation," Mr. Davidson said during one of their lessons. "But hiding your gift doesn't serve anyone, including yourself. The community needs to hear what you can do." Marcus discussed the opportunity with his grandmother that evening. Rose Williams sat at their small kitchen table, still wearing her diner uniform after a long shift, listening as Marcus described his teacher's suggestion. "Baby," she said softly, "I've watched you practice on that old keyboard for years, and I've seen how music lights you up from the inside. If you want to share that light with others, I'll be right there cheering you on." Her encouragement gave Marcus the confidence he needed. He agreed to perform at the winter concert, choosing a piece that would showcase his technical skills while remaining emotionally accessible to a general audience. The announcement that Marcus Williams would be performing a piano solo at the winter concert generated considerable buzz throughout the school and community. Many parents who had heard about his extraordinary abilities from their children planned to attend specifically to hear him play. Mr. Davidson worked with Marcus to select the perfect piece for his debut performance. They chose Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, a challenging and beautiful composition that would demonstrate his technical mastery while telling a compelling, emotional story. As the concert date approached, Marcus felt nervous excitement building inside him. This performance would be different from his spontaneous demonstration in the music room. This time, he was prepared, properly trained, and ready to share his gift with the entire community. The night before the concert, Marcus practiced at home on his old keyboard, running through the piece one final time. His grandmother sat nearby, mending uniforms and listening to the beautiful music filling their small apartment. "You ready for tomorrow, baby?" she asked during a pause between pieces. Marcus looked at the worn keys of his keyboard, thinking about the journey that had brought him to this moment. From humiliation to opportunity, from isolation to friendship, from self-doubt to confidence. "Yes, Grandma," he said with quiet certainty. "I'm ready." The evening of the winter concert arrived with an unexpected snowfall that blanketed Jefferson Middle School in pristine white. The auditorium buzzed with excitement as families, teachers, and community members filled the red velvet seats. Marcus stood backstage, wearing a borrowed black suit that Mr. Davidson had arranged for him, watching through the curtains as the audience settled in. His grandmother sat in the third row, having taken her first night off from the diner in months. She wore her best dress and a proud smile that hadn't left her face since arriving at the school. Next to her sat Mrs. Henderson, his English teacher, who had become another source of encouragement during his musical journey. Mr. Davidson approached Marcus backstage, carrying a program and looking more nervous than his student. "How are you feeling?" the teacher asked, adjusting Marcus's tie with paternal care. "Good," Marcus replied, and he meant it. The butterflies in his stomach felt like excitement rather than fear. "Thank you for everything, Mr. Davidson. For the lessons, for believing in me, for helping me get here." The teacher's eyes grew misty. "Marcus, watching your growth these past months has reminded me why I became a music teacher in the first place. You've taught me as much as I've taught you." The concert began with the school band performing a medley of holiday classics, followed by the choir singing traditional winter songs. Marcus watched from the wings as his classmates performed, feeling genuine pride in their accomplishments and grateful to be part of the school's musical community. Jennifer Lawson stepped forward for her flute solo, a piece she had practiced extensively with Marcus's help. Her performance was confident and beautiful, a vast improvement from her earlier playing. When she finished, she caught Marcus's eye backstage and mouthed "thank you" with a radiant smile. Principal Matthews stepped to the microphone as the applause for Jennifer died down. "Our final performer tonight needs no introduction to our school community. Marcus Williams has amazed us all with his extraordinary musical talent and dedication. Please welcome Marcus to perform Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor." Marcus walked onto the stage as applause filled the auditorium. The bright stage lights momentarily blinded him, but as his eyes adjusted, he saw faces looking up at him with anticipation and respect. These were the same people who had barely noticed him months ago, now gathered specifically to hear him perform. He sat at the grand piano, the same instrument where his journey had begun with that moment of intended humiliation. Now it felt like an old friend, familiar and welcoming. Marcus adjusted the bench, positioned his hands above the keys, and took a deep breath. The first notes of the ballade filled the auditorium with haunting beauty. Marcus's fingers moved across the keys with the precision and grace he had developed through months of dedicated practice with Mr. Davidson. But more than technical skill, his performance was infused with the emotional depth that came from his life experiences. The music told a story of struggle and triumph, of isolation and belonging, of hidden talents finally given room to flourish. Every note carried the weight of his journey, from that broken keyboard in his apartment to this moment on stage before his entire community. In the audience, parents who had come to support their own children found themselves completely captivated by Marcus's performance. Some had tears in their eyes, moved by the raw emotion and incredible skill they were witnessing. Others sat in stunned silence, unable to believe that such mature, professional-level playing was coming from a 12-year-old boy. Rose Williams watched her grandson with pride that filled her entire being. She thought about the sacrifice of buying that old keyboard years ago, money that could have gone toward bills or groceries. She remembered countless evenings listening to Marcus practice the same passages over and over, determined to master every difficult section. All of that dedication and love was flowing through his fingers now, creating something beautiful for everyone to share. As Marcus reached the climactic section of the ballade, his playing became even more powerful and expressive. His hands moved with incredible speed and accuracy, navigating the most technically demanding passages with ease while never losing the emotional core of the music. The entire auditorium seemed to hold its breath, caught up in the magical performance unfolding before them. Mr. Davidson stood in the wings with tears streaming down his face. He thought about that day when he had tried to humiliate Marcus, using the boy's background and appearance to make assumptions about his abilities. The shame of that moment would stay with him forever, but it had also taught him invaluable lessons about prejudice, potential, and the responsibility teachers have to nurture every student. When Marcus played the final, gentle notes of the ballade, the auditorium remained silent for several heartbeats. Then, as the last echo faded away, the entire audience erupted in thunderous applause. People rose to their feet spontaneously, clapping with enthusiasm that seemed to shake the building. Marcus stood and bowed, overwhelmed by the response. The applause continued for several minutes, with shouts of bravo and amazing echoing throughout the space. He had never experienced anything like this level of appreciation and recognition. Principal Matthews returned to the microphone, waiting for the applause to subside. Ladies and gentlemen, what we have just witnessed is truly extraordinary. Marcus Williams represents everything we hope to achieve in education: the discovery and nurturing of exceptional talent, regardless of a student's background or circumstances. The principal's words resonated throughout the auditorium. Many parents began to think about their own assumptions and prejudices, wondering what other hidden talents might exist among students they had overlooked or dismissed. After the concert, Marcus was surrounded by audience members wanting to congratulate him and learn more about his musical journey. Local newspaper reporters asked for interviews, and several parents inquired about private lessons for their children. Mrs. Rodriguez, the high school music teacher, approached with an older gentleman Marcus didn't recognize. "Marcus," she said excitedly, "I'd like you to meet Professor Chun from the State University's Music Conservatory. He drove 2 hours to hear you perform tonight." Professor Chun shook Marcus's hand warmly. "Young man, I've been teaching piano for 30 years, and what I heard tonight was truly exceptional. Have you ever considered pursuing music professionally?" The question opened up possibilities Marcus had barely dared to imagine. Professor Chun explained scholarship programs for talented young musicians, summer intensives at prestigious conservatories, and pathways to professional musical careers. With talent like yours and the right opportunities, Professor Chun continued, you could perform with major orchestras, record albums, or become a teacher who inspires the next generation of musicians. Rose Williams listened to these conversations with wonder and excitement, realizing that her grandson's future might be bigger and brighter than either of them had ever dreamed. As the evening wound down and the auditorium slowly emptied, Marcus found himself alone at the piano one more time. He sat down and played softly a simple melody he had composed during his lessons with Mr. Davidson. The notes drifted through the empty space, peaceful and content. Mr. Davidson joined him on the stage, placing a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "How does it feel?" the teacher asked. Marcus considered the question carefully. "It feels like I found where I belong," he said finally. "Not just with music, but with people who see what I can do instead of what I don't have." "That's exactly right," Mr. Davidson agreed. "And, Marcus, this is just the beginning. What you accomplished tonight, the way you've grown these past months, it's shown everyone what's possible when talent meets opportunity and hard work." As they prepared to leave the auditorium, Marcus looked back at the piano one more time. He thought about that day when he had been asked to play as a joke, when teachers and students expected a laugh at his ignorance and inexperience. Instead, that moment of intended cruelty had become the catalyst for everything good that followed. Sometimes the worst moments in life contain the seeds of the best ones. Sometimes being underestimated becomes the motivation to exceed everyone's expectations. And sometimes a broken keyboard in a small apartment can be the first step toward a future filled with music, respect, and unlimited possibilities. Marcus Williams walked out of Jefferson Middle School that night as a completely different person than he had been just a few months earlier. He was still the same boy with the same heart and the same dedication, but now the world could see what his grandmother had always known, That greatness comes in many forms and from many places, often where people least expect to find it. The snow continued to fall gently outside as Marcus and his grandmother made their way home, both of them knowing that their lives had changed forever. Tomorrow would bring new opportunities, new challenges, and new dreams to pursue. But tonight they would simply celebrate the beautiful music that had brought a community together and proven that talent, dedication, and courage could overcome any obstacle. In his pocket, Marcus carried Professor Chin's business card and information about summer music programs. His future, once limited by other people's assumptions and circumstances beyond his control, now stretched out before him like an endless symphony waiting to be played.